Governor Mitt Romney kicks off his fall campaign for the White House. The road ahead is likely to, of course, get rougher. Former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin says he can expect the president to ramp up his attacks against the GOP ticket as Election Day draws near. Guy Benson is a radio talk show host and the political editor for townhall.com. And by the way, Guy, you were the first and possibly only reporter in America to have the Clint Eastwood story a day before it happened. You knew that he was going to be the mystery guest at the convention. How did you know that?
Well, Allison, it was actually just fortuitous. I was at a party after one of the nights of the convention. It was very late. I was exhausted. I almost didn't go to the party, but I got a very credible tip from a very credible person close to the Romney campaign, and voila, a big scoop. So I think the moral of the story is always go to fancy parties.
I learned that long ago, and I follow that adage. But Guy, did you have any idea what Clint Eastwood would be saying at the convention?
No, I don't think anyone did, and I wonder if he exactly did at certain times. I mean, Allison, you know as well as I do that when we watch these conventions year after year, they are very carefully choreographed down to every smile, every syllable, every wave. So to have an unscripted piece of performance art by an octogenarian on stage was surreal. It was surreal to watch. As someone who was sitting in the audience, the intro was awesome. It was so cool to see Clint up there. The audience was eating it up. Then he starts addressing this empty chair, and it was kind of hard to hear him in the hall at times. And I was worried that this thing might be veering off into just disaster, cringeworthy territory. But he kind of pulled it back together at the end and made some points that I thought really hit home just for your average person at home. He said, look, this government belongs to us, the people, not to these politicians. They're our employees. And if you've got a guy who isn't getting the job done, you let him go. Just very plain spoken. And I think that he brought things back in there, but I can imagine that the Romney camp is sitting there watching, saying, uh-oh, what's going to happen next? That's a big risk, but it looks like they survived it. It probably appealed to a lot of people.
It sure sounded like it in the hall, but you're right. I'm sure there were some white-knuckled moments for all of the staffers who had tried to choreograph it so carefully. So let's talk about moving forward and how Mitt Romney can capitalize on this momentum. What happens during this next week, do you think?
Well, what happens this next week is the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte. And I think it's going to be very interesting to watch exactly what they're going to say, what their message is going to be, and how they're going to present President Obama. Because if you're the Democrats at this moment, I don't envy them because they have a very tough task. They have to convince Americans to re-elect someone who has an empirically disastrous record. He can't run on the economy. His own pollsters are telling him you can't convince people there's a real recovery here because there isn't. The day after he gives his acceptance speech on Friday, we'll have another unemployment report, which should be very interesting to look at. So I think they're going to run, my prediction is, a very, very negative campaign focused on narrow things like free government-mandated birth control and student loans and how awful Mitt Romney is. And I think that the Romney campaign, what they need to do is just springboard off of what we just saw. I think it was a very successful convention for the GOP. And we just heard that report from Trace Gallagher, the humanizing of Mitt Romney, from some of his friends, some of the people in his church, and his wife. I think that will go a long way to at least possibly start to close some of that likability gap, which is, I think, the biggest obstacle Romney has to being elected president.
But, Guy, it's funny, right, that Mitt Romney hasn't been comfortable trumpeting any of those stories. I mean, as Trace just pointed out, they're powerful stories. Voters would like to hear about those. The campaign surely would like to humanize him. Will Mitt Romney become more comfortable telling some of the personal stories that we heard him talk about a little bit in his speech last night, where he even appeared to get choked up talking at times about his parents?
Yeah, his parents and his children. I'll tell you, I'm going to be actually posting the video of those families talking about how Mitt Romney helped them during really terrible ordeals and trials at townhall.com later today. I was sitting there as a member of the media trying to just sit and analyze, and I'll admit on national television, I cried. It was that moving. And these were things I've covered Mitt Romney for more than a year. I'd never heard these stories, and I think that it's awkward, right? Because Romney doesn't want to go out there being, hey, look what a great person I am, look how compassionate I am, because that doesn't come naturally to him. Bragging can sort of seem unseemly, but at the same time, these stories are part of his story, and I think they run counter to the caricature we've seen painted of him as this like cretinous, greedy monster.
Well, Guy Benson, feel free to continue bringing us your scoops. Good work.
Thanks, Allison.